Time for the Como Vanguard podcast. I'm David Lile. Nick Knoth is here, and we're in the wonderful surroundings of the mayor of Columbia, which is, I've got to admit, I don't remember ever being here, no matter who the mayor was. So this is like my first memory of being in this room. And Barbara Buffaloe is our guest. It's good to see you, Mayor. How are you?
I'm good to see you, David. Hey, Nick. Nick's been in this office before.
A time or two over the years and under different mayors. Although the thought just struck me as we sit here. Just a couple weeks ago, we were in the city manager's office, which is just around the corner. And I can't help but think, I think his office is a little bigger.
His office is 100% bigger. So is his paycheck, though.
He
So
had
maybe
a-
that's it.
Yeah.
He had a conference table.
He
had
does have a conference
table.
table. I have a tiny table and 4 very awkwardly uncomfortable armchairs that you will start to continue to slide lower and lower.
I was looking for the lever. I want the recliner here.
Well, and as a short person, I often am having to just sit on my legs.
So when I started here in Columbia, my first memory of a mayor would be Darwin Hindman. Where
Same.
was his offices?
So on the 5th floor of the old side
Mhm.
of the building, either 4th or 5th floor on the old side of the building.
So this
So like
part was built, it still seems new, I would imagine, to some Colombians.
2010
Yeah.
is when we moved into this new. I know that because that's exactly when I started working for the city in February 2010, and we had like just moved into this
Wow.
building.
So
or
when
we're
did you
moving into
when
this
did you
building.
move to Columbia?
In 1998. Yeah,
Wow.
so I came here under Darwin.
Yeah.
Darwin is the mayor. No, wait, I came here. It was still Marion McCollum, and then Darwin. But I didn't know anything about local politics until. So my first memory of a mayor is Darwin Hindman.
Wow, I didn't realize you came in the 90s. That's pretty neat.
I know. I get to say I came in the 90s.
Yeah.
Am I mistaken? Didn't you left for a little bit in there, didn't you?
In 2002,
Like
when
very
I
brief.
graduated, in 2002, I graduated in December of 2002 because I studied abroad one semester, so it like set me back 6 months. So in 2002, December 2002, when I graduated, I moved to Illinois quickly with my parents, but then St. Louis and worked for an architecture firm in St. Louis until that following summer. So there was a few months that I lived, actually no, a full year I lived there. No, that's not right. 2005. Sorry, 2005 was when I moved back. So 3 years.
Okay,
Yeah, because that's where I met my husband. And then he got into med school here and we moved back.
gotcha.
So I have a question. Do you approve of the music that the hacky sack guy plays when he's right outside your window playing?
You know, I will say hi to him when I see him. He follows me on social media, I know. So I can see him out there. I don't often get to hear it. It's pretty quiet here.
Pretty
You know who I do
soundproof.
hear are all the honking at noon when people are honking their horns for peace.
Sure.
So yeah, I definitely hear that.
So this is Como Vanguard, which is the podcast to Como Vanguard, which is the published Nick Knoth publication. And we meet and regularly talk about the city council meeting. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today. Are there any questions or comments that we have from previous podcasts, Nick?
I did check about an hour ago, and no takers on this one. And we even dangled out there that our next guest was going to be the mayor, and I guess that just wasn't enough.
Because they're just so happy with everything.
Yeah, they're like, why would I have any questions of the mayor
Well, they
or
probably would,
concerns?
or they probably say like, I'm probably going to see her at an upcoming meeting. I can just ask her to her face.
That's right.
Oh.
That's right. So no questions this time. So I suppose we can jump straight into last night's council meeting, which for this iteration of council was a short meeting. It only went till like 10:30, and that's pretty good by
10,
standards.
12, but okay.
Was it 10:12?
It was before
Okay.
10:30.
Well, your notes today said 10:12 or 10:10,
Okay,
something like
trust
that.
the notes. Don't trust my memory. The notes are more accurate. But went not too late, which is, as somebody who had to wake up at 5 a.m. this morning, I appreciated that.
Yeah.
But lighter agenda. Some of the topics on there were the airport department being formalized
hmm
with council's blessing. Really only creating one new full-time position, which, if I'm remembering correctly,
The deputy.
is the
Right,
deputy
correct.
director position, because the director is going to be Mike Parks, I presume.
You know what? We don't get into the details on
Yes.
who is filling the role. That is my assumption as
Yeah.
well, since he is the fearless leader of the airport. I think it'll be hard pressed to find
Right.
somebody better for that, and somebody who's like he's so deserving to receive that.
He's currently the airport manager, long time, as you noted.
He's worked there for 25. They
Yes.
said something like
I think
25
he
years.
said
Started
that
out as
last night.
safety.
So he goes
Officer?
back to when the only thing out there was a horse and buggy, as far as our airport is concerned.
Explain the way that they explained why there needs to be a department, but then also someone who would be very close to Mike as his assistant or executive,
Yeah.
whatever the title's going to be.
Right. Well, I think, one of the things they talked about is just in the last 5 years, like the growth that we've seen. Every regional airport obviously experienced hits during COVID, right? We saw United leave us. We saw, a reduction in flights going out. But the growth that we've gotten back, right? We are back to 2019 numbers when we were seeing tremendous growth. And they project that we're going to be even like 40% above that going forward. So that growth and managing that growth and understanding also the infrastructure complexities that are happening out there, that's where, it's kind of elevated itself to being the need to be a department because of that. I think they mentioned too, what is it, $100 million of investment
Hmm.
in infrastructure, those grants coming from the federal government. Managing that is a full-time job in itself, let alone managing the operations of the airport, making the relationships with airlines, right? So you have to have those relationships in order for them to want to invest in your airport. And then obviously managing the staff and being proactive on this. So all of that to say, the need of the department was obvious. And then having a deputy, right now it's just Mike Parks. I mean, he has a few operations people, some mechanics, and the safety officers obviously out there, but it's really just Mike that's doing all of that. And so having a deputy that's reporting to him, right, is kind of allowing to open up to delegate some of those activities.
My wife and I have probably used the airport 4 or 5 times just since the beginning of this year. And so we're out there regularly. And then we took a drive out there just a couple of days ago to see where the new parking lot is. And it's on the south side. It's basically, I would say, on the other side of the postal facility. And it's interesting because I'm curious as to, are all of the cars that are out there in the parking lots right now people who are using flights out of Columbia Regional Airport?
The
Or is that
majority.
like rented out for somebody to use some factory?
No, no.
Because it's amazing how many vehicles are out there.
The majority of those would be people flying at COU. I think, what do we have? Like estimated 240,000 enplanements last year. Like, if you think about that and where we were when I came, right, you talking about when I came here in 98. And like, if you look at those numbers, like they had the numbers last night, at least for 2000 and 2005, where you could see it was something like 19,000 employments going out. And it's just kind of insane to you to think. So, if you saw the parking lots, then you also saw kind of our shuttle system, or at least
Hmm.
some of the bus stops we're putting out there, because as we're having to, until we can build up, we're having to kind of build out a little bit in some of those surface lots. And so really figuring out how do we get people to the terminal in a timely fashion so that they can make their flight.
I'm a little worried because I'm thinking that there will be rush times when people, if they're in that parking lot, will have to wait a while. And I'm just wondering, I think it's too early. Obviously, we don't know that yet, but I think it's going to be interesting to hear those who have come back and found that their cars are no longer parked on grass, but have been towed to the new lot, what they're going to, how they're reacting. And then also people who are waiting for a 15 passenger van or bus when you've got several people that are there for an early flight.
Yeah. It was interesting when I was talking to Mike Parks about this, like how are we doing the signage, right? To let people, like the wayfinding, like what are we putting out there to even know where the bus shuttle stops are? But I think to your point, are we putting up signage about towing, right? About where you can park and where you can't, and just really getting that information. They're putting out a lot press releases. You're seeing it in the newspaper. I've heard it on the radio, obviously, and then putting it out on social media. But it is definitely, I think that's why they kind of also gave that leeway, that period of time where they're not going to be, but they are kind of putting the reminders on the windshields. But to your point, what if they're gone longer
Yeah,
than
for
a couple
sure.
weeks?
Well, and I know we don't want to talk about the airport for a while, but I really believe that you have explained well the growth that it has incurred. And then also, I think there will come a time, and it's important that there is a department and there's a deputy for whoever the executive director is of that, because there's going to have to be some decisions made as far as parking is concerned. And I'm not talking just about charging for parking, but I think there becomes a time where you have to have a building.
Yeah,
And you're
a
going to
parking
have to
structure.
have a structure
Hmm.
with a building of several layers because
And
you can't just keep growing out.
no, and I
I mean,
don't want
there's room
to.
for that,
I
but
don't want to have a huge heat island
yeah.
happening near the airport for people landing. That's not necessarily the aesthetics I want for you to see overhead when you're coming down. We've talked about this, and we're a little bit restricted on where we could build a parking structure, not just because of like leases and which properties we own, but for the ones that we've used federal funding to build those surface lots,
Mm,
we are restricted
mm.
from charging for parking for that. And so I know though, as you get closer to the terminal, I believe, especially in the older lot, that is open. Like that is, we have a little bit more flexibility there. So I'm looking to see like what is our next steps for sort of planning for that, because then you could charge for parking because it is closer as well as being undercover. So there's like an amenity to that, but also it will allow us to have more parking rather than continuing to sprawl.
Nick, I'm looking forward to having Mike Parks on so we can talk
Yes.
specifically about the airport because I have other questions about
Oh,
the
yeah, and
airport.
he
I
knows
mean,
way more. Like, don't let me keep faking it.
like I'd
Well-
like to know how often that other runway, not the main
Is
runway
used.
that is always used, but is the other one that a lot of money was put into to make. How often is that used, and especially by commercial flights? Because
Sometimes
I
I've
haven't
seen a
ever seen
little.
it used.
I've seen it once.
And I'm thinking, why spend that much money on a runway and not use that thing? So
I-
that's a question for Mike. Then.
That's
There we
definitely
go.
an investment. And to your point, we'll wait for confirmation from Mike Parks when he joins us on the show. But that definitely strikes me as one of those future-looking investments, right?
Sure.
To handle a higher frequency of flights, one would imagine. My selfish plea to the Columbia Airport, I assume Mike Parks listens, as all city staff do, I'm sure, that as someone who flies in and out of that airport just about weekly, including this month, man, getting an Uber from the airport back into town, that is brutal. That is a brutal experience.
Wow.
Is it expensive or
It's expensive, and you're waiting upwards of half an hour. To
they
get
don't just
some-
have people hanging out there?
you have to be lucky in terms of timing
Yeah.
of somebody being dropped off, but I take an Uber out there more often than not, especially now with all the construction with the
Yeah.
parking lot. Now, I'll add this, as I've said to the folks, that's coming out of my company's pocket, not mine. So that's don't think I'm just blowing money on my end.
Yeah,
but
I would like to see some sort of kind of shuttle system coming from, some of those like satellite parking
Mhm.
lots that we have, especially the ones that are at 63 and Grindstone. I've also, when Boone County and then MoDOT, like when there's been some of those kind of like strategic plans happening, like Boone County's master plan, I was one of the ones being like, I want to see a trail system or bus or light rail system connecting Columbia to the airport and Ashland and continuing south. Like, I want to see other things besides just the reliance on single occupancy vehicles taking people to the airport.
Well, and just on the rideshare aspect of it too, it is something where you see larger airports have those, just like with airlines, formal agreements with Uber or Lyft or whoever it is.
Yeah.
But I like that idea too. I like your idea better, which is how do we adapt the Colt Railroad, which is already going to
Keep it coming
Centralia,
south. Yeah.
and divert it to where it goes to the airport
Yeah.
into Ashland.
I just
like
think,
that.
I don't know. I just think about, we have, there's, you have, like when you're talking about the future growth of that runway, right? How do we then put in the infrastructure for the future growth of transportation and how people get there? I mean, my dream someday, skipping ahead, I don't know if you guys covered because it hasn't been on a council meeting, but us going back to the 45-minute bus routes, rather than the 90-minute headway over having the 45-minute, like, I'm really want us to get towards like a regional transit authority where we have a system that's not only meeting the needs of Columbia, but like mid-Missouri and really connecting. And I think playing into the airport is a big part of that.
You two might live to see that happen, but I'm not quite sure that the third one of us will. If we move on into the council meeting, and this is, again, not one of the bigger things, but I want you to explain, for my purposes of understanding, and maybe somebody else, when they got to talking to Matthew Liu, and I think the police chief came on, and then the head of the Parks and Recreation Department came on, it was something about budget adjustments that happen now quarterly rather than, I thought that made perfect sense, but I was confused about why council members are confused about that.
So they were not confused about why to do the quarterly.
They seem to like the idea of doing it
They do.
quarterly,
It's
but
the
then
level-
they seem to have questions about it. And it's like, okay,
So
folks,
if
it should be simple.
Yeah. So if you look back to, so when I first came onto council, it was like a budget adjustment every single council
I
meeting.
would see that on the
Right.
agenda.
And often on consent, right? It would be like, okay, that makes sense. You have a capital project. You're now just you're appropriating the funds for it, right? Or it's from one project to another because you had leftover funds in one transformer project and you're going to put it in the other. That's fine. If you look at that though, it would be a council memo for that one adjustment. And that one council memo would have probably 3 sentences in the executive summary and maybe 2 paragraphs in the general description, as well as the dollar amounts and where it was coming from and any legislative history. By doing it as a quarterly, if you look at the council memo and the ordinance that's attached to it, the council memo, it'll say for that electric transformer project, right? It says electric, $3.5 million, moving from transformer project because of arcing. That one actually had more details, so I'm being very general in that. Whereas if it had been on the previous way it was done, that would have had 2 paragraphs about how does the transformer, how does this work within the electric grid? What redundancy is it providing for reliable electricity providing? Why are we doing it now? Like, do we have a crisis right now? Is it that we're planning ahead because it takes 2 to 3 years? These are all things that Gwen with the electric utility last night said. He explained that when he came up to answer those questions, but they're not in that memo. And so it's to council's point last night, part of the reason why DeCarlin had it on old business, it's normally on consent, was because there was asset forfeiture funds being used for the police department. And that is obviously sometimes a very hot topic about how we're using asset forfeiture funds in Columbia. And so he was having it as a public conversation because he knew those would be questions that would be asked. If it were in a council memo, Jill could have the police chief could have added, additional information to kind of explain a little bit more of that about where those funds come from and why it's being used for this in that. And then that way the public sees it and it doesn't have to be on old business.
Okay, I have two questions in regard to that. First of all, I couldn't believe that somebody asked the question, what is a forfeiture fund? It's like, where have you been? I mean, it's been in the news, not just here, but statewide and other places. That seems to be a simple.
There's some people newer to council who might not have been following some of these. We're a complex organization.
All right,
Dave
so
Lyle.
fair enough. I'll give you that. And then
This is their fourth meeting.
The other question is it appropriate? What you just said at the end of your answer a moment ago is going to be your answer to this one, so that the public, and I understand that many of the questions that some city council members seem to be asking now are more for the public's benefit rather than for their benefit, in my opinion. And so I get that. But
I would agree.
Part of that, I think, is I don't know if some of these discussions are appropriate for a council meeting. If I'm a council member and I see on the agenda that there's going to be a discussion about $9 million on a budget adjustment, then why not ahead of time or some other time communicate and say, okay, I get this. I understand it's all been a smooth process in the past. I don't want to take time on a Monday night. Help me understand this.
I think it's because there's not as many opportunities. I would agree with you. I don't think that many people are paying attention on a Monday night as
I would agree.
or they're going to turn off by the time we've continued on to that.
I would agree
because of this. But then the question is, how do you get that information out there? And for many in councils past and councils present, the way of getting that information out there to show that they know of questions that the public might have about something is to ask it at a council meeting and have it be read at a council meeting. So I think the question is more of what's a better way for us to communicate, like how the city budget works, how appropriations work, where a project might change mid-year, mid-budget year. And I will say, that's where I've been really happy with what city staff have been doing, like the budget town halls, the Let's Talk Locals. They have a community classroom on Wednesday or there's some day this week where they're talking about municipal bonds. And those are the perfect, for me, opportunities to kind of get those questions out there in a way that people can understand. I don't know that the best use is at that Monday meeting, but it's one of the most common ones that you see. It's the way the Columbia seems to have done it.
And it seems like what they're doing is just trying to get on record to say, well, I asked this question. And you're right. Most people in the city are not paying attention. There are very few of us. I wouldn't be paying attention if Nick Knoth hadn't asked me to be part of these podcasts because I find them to be very tedious and very trying. And I'm thinking
from a meeting.
And I'm thinking from the perspective of a regular citizen, and I'm thinking, I can't handle this after 4 or 5 months of this. I need something different to change this process. So my question then becomes, media used to do this, and I'm a product of some of the media here in town, and I'm no longer a part of that. And we fail because we don't have reporters that dig into things like they once probably did. So my question becomes, with the new communications department that the city council has approved for the city manager to start to go towards, couldn't they? And then it's going to become a part of us trusting that we're not just getting the party line or the company word, but at the same time, they could communicate this and maybe find a larger audience through written communication that, again, would help to flesh out the details of certain things that we're just talking about.
I would love that, but you just said it, right? That trust in that you're not just getting the party line. We will put out just factual information, right, that are out there. And there's going to be people out there like, well, I think there's more to this. They're hiding it. And it's more about making sure you've built that trust within the community to be like, I'm not going to believe you, anonymous Facebook group. I'm going to go to the source and
But
ask questions.
at the same time, when I go on to preview a city council meeting and I go on the agenda that's posted, and then I click on certain things like the discussion or the previous, that is to me as
So useful.
objective as it can possibly be. I feel no bias or prejudice in those descriptions. So that could be the standard or the
I like that.
form for
Yeah.
doing that.
No, I like that. And I think this is like one of the things that I struggle with is that definitely the way that we see kind of like the coverage of a council meeting, right? You do see like there's 4 Missourian reporters in the front row every meeting, right? And they're kind of working together to report on it. But they change every semester, and then summer's a different, winter breaks a different ones, right? There's not that consistent one that's watching. We put out, the city manager has been starting these video series. I don't know if you've seen where like on the Friday before a council meeting, he gives a little bit of a preview about what are some of the hot topics on and then on the Tuesday following, he does like another video of like, what did we talk about last night?
So is he competing with us then?
Hey.
His are very short because they're for social media. So it's like, are people going to
They're
watch?
shorts.
Yeah, they're
They're like a
basically little
TikTok
shorts.
equivalent.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And one thing that I will always, I will die on this hill, frankly, which is it does not matter what the city does. They will never reach everyone. Right.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
or even a majority. I mean, and
Do you remember? Sorry.
No, you go
Do you
ahead.
remember when we switched to automated collections? When we switched to automated collection for roll carts, and I got an email from somebody that said, like, "What is this? Why didn't anybody tell me?"
Yeah. Well, that's
And I
my
was
point.
like, "What are we?"
And we talked about this with the city manager, where a huge thing that's changed in his tenure is all the community engagement, all the communications, and that is kind of the latest example being that communications department David talked about. But I couldn't. I can never help myself when people are like, oh, why don't they do this or that, or why is a city council member taking extra length to explain this at a council meeting, even though they might themselves might understand it, because so few people attend a council meeting, right? That's a whole other thing. But to me, it comes down to like people do not engage with their city government unless they're upset or something comes up on their radar, which is infrequent if things are going well, right?
Right.
Generally, that goes back to that trust. Like people trust that their trash is going to get collected on their trash day and the pothole's going to get filled outside of winter, folks. I just don't think it's possible. I mean, even last night on this council agenda was Stacy with the city manager's office provided the staff report on the community summit.
Yep.
This was the second year of that happening. That had roughly 200 people attend it, which was a huge success. Well, 200 people is like 0.1% of the city's population, or not even 0.1% of the
Yeah.
city's population. And that's successful, right?
Yeah.
And so like it's just not possible. They could, DeCarlin or the mayor, as you yourself I know, put
Yeah.
out those shorts, so to
Yeah.
speak, on Instagram or
Yeah.
wherever. It's just not possible. You're not going to reach people. Don't want to be reached until they're upset because suddenly we have roll carts.
Well, and to your point about council, right? And every council member is their own individual, right? Making their own choices. We work together, but they have their own kind of inputs, right? And so some are probably being said like, thank you. Like, thank you so much for, making that question, whatever. And I say to my thing is that, when we talk about, I want to have the public voice, right? I want to make sure that the public have an opportunity to engage with their local government. I find it more successful in some of those outreach going into the neighborhoods than I do at the first and third Mondays. And that's why I don't like to do performative government from the dais. I do understand sometimes, like if you're seeing something maybe in traditional media or you've seen something out there that seems to be catching, that you might want to bring it up at the council meeting, just to your point, have it on record, that like a correction, or give staff. That's usually what I'm trying to do, is give staff that opportunity to correct the narrative with the objective, here are just the facts that we know.
Well, I'm glad that you use the word performative, because I have used that before in private, talking about what I think is being done by some council members. And I also think that sometimes one person, or maybe two, or a small group has said something to a council person, and they bring it up as a point just to prove to the other people who brought a concern to them, I heard you, I've brought it up to the council. I don't think anybody goes back and scours the record to say, oh yeah, that's very well done. I sometimes think, though, that what they bring up is so repetitive because it is one voice that is complaining about something that I'm thinking the majority of people, if they would spend time to watch this over and over, would eventually say, you know what, we got it. We got it. Move on.
Yeah, it's hard to, right? That's the whole squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? Like that idea that like if the person keeps complaining, eventually somebody's going to address it or bring it up. For me, it does really depend on is like what is what's the outcome? Like what's the issue that they're raising? And if I see like, you know what, that is an issue. Like it's not always
And
to
I
me
th-
about the messenger because sometimes somebody who is I think you call them on the report the gadflies, right? So
Yeah.
so sometimes there is that person, but you know what? Every once in a while, oh, you know what? I didn't know that. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I do kind of want to know the answer to that.
that,
I'm a rational
everybody
optimist.
gets a hit once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Um,
for sure. And a lot of this too is goes back to what the council's discussed at its retreat, where there's procedural changes that can be made, but it's also my belief has always been for the too many years now that I've been watching council meetings is that every council member has a different philosophy about what they believe a council meeting is.
Yes.
And to me, my my philosophy using that that viewpoint, my belief, my philosophy is that council meetings are the end result where decisions are made after a long process has occurred. Now, if that process hasn't occurred, like public input or community engagement has lapsed, those are different issues to bring up. But I've always viewed council meetings like this is the end result. To your point, this is the business meeting where council takes votes and moves on and moves forward on whatever the subjects are. That is
That is my attempt.
obviously
That is my attempt.
that is very clearly not a universal belief. Not just with this current makeup of council. That's always there's always a diverse makeup of
Mhm.
perspectives on council, which is great. But on this perspective, in terms of like how one perceives council meetings to be, the purpose that they serve or how they should be done is radically different. And I think this specific council is especially harsh in that contrast, I feel.
Yeah, yeah. I would say, I mean, part of it is, I think too, is that we have a lot, and I should also start this like the foundation of like everyone who's on council, everyone who I believe this across the board, past councils, in present councils, like these are people who want to serve, right?
Mhm.
They love Columbia, they want to serve, they want to bring the voice. They want to bring some of the voices. They want to bring voices, right? The residents to local government. And I think what I see is that we also have a lot of new council members. And so part of that is some of it is learning on the dais because this is a new process, right? We have one newly elected person in April. We had one new the previous August. We had a new in the April. I mean, like, so we've had a new council member every election that for the last, well, for me, it's been like my whole tenure. Like we've had people leave early, we've had people resign, we've had people like just not run for reelection. So when you have that turnover, it's hard to reset to the cadence of this is the business meeting, this is the engagement process. We talk a lot about onboarding, like when a new council member is coming on. Here's how do you bring them up to speed on a full service city that has a lot of complex issues, and they just got done campaigning, the campaign trail where special interests are asking you for big issues, and you're having to basically be performing at those candidate forums. What is it, like campaigning is easy, governing is harder, right? That's true. It's totally different. And so I think that's what you're seeing a little bit too is that influence of still learning some of the aspects to the job.
Well, it's a shame also because you're losing Nick Foster, who was one
Don't even make me cry on a
Yeah.
podcast.
who would be, well, he choked up on our podcast with him a couple of times ago, which I think is natural. And it shows a love for the city. And I think
Yeah.
it shows a love for a person who you trusted had best interest in heart for his ward as well as the city. But you've lost him. You better not lose Betsy Peters, because I'll tell you what, you're going to have a really interesting situation depending on who replaces those people. I think there needs to be, I mean, and I'm speaking, I understand.
As a fourth ward councilman or fourth ward resident.
But I'm thinking of my age, and I'm thinking I have a different perspective now than I would have 50 years ago.
And this is a job, this is a position that it is getting harder and harder to get people to want to run for this.
Because I think back at some of the people who have run, who were new on the council, but who did bring to it a certain, I'm going to learn from the people who had been there before.
And they might have come in with a bias, but then quickly learned, oh, there's a lot more
I've got
to
things
this
to learn.
organization. I have things to learn. I need to understand more about city staff. What are their priorities? What are they already working on that maybe the public doesn't know when I was knocking on doors? Yeah, and I will tell you, so Betsy has the longest experience, obviously, on council. We did at the retreat, I don't know if you talked about it, we did this, stand up. Every city staff member that was down there, so the department leadership and council members, stand up in your time of tenure interacting with the city. And they let me stand with my combined tenure, which was, 15 years. So 11 years working for the city, 4 on council. And it's so interesting to see all of the rest of my council members in that first tranche of group. And then a big span, a lot of new staff. And then there was only one other group that was longer than me there.
Well, just to be clear for folks listening, what we're describing is that with Nick Foster leaving, which is effective June 12th, I believe, Mayor Buffalo and Councilwoman Betsy Peters in the 6th Ward will be the only council members who have served more than 3 years.
Who have served a full term.
Right.
I mean,
Because after Betsy, I believe the next longest serving person is Jackie.
so it'd be Betsy.
Sorry, after you and Betsy.
Then
Yeah.
me, then so Jackie was, but that's 1 year.
Oh, that's my point.
It's 1 year.
None of them are.
Yeah.
There was not a single council member who has been reelected to a second full term, because Valerie Carroll came in to complete a term, so she served less than 2 years. In
Right.
that capacity, more like a year and a half.
So then actually she would be longer than Jackie.
She was elected August 24. I thought Jackie was elected
25.
April 24.
April 25.
Oh, was it April 25?
Because she was elected so 3, 4 in mayor.
So
But this is to show you,
Yeah.
right? Like this sort of turnover. And then not just the turnover, but here's the other thing with this. And this is what I'm worried about with losing Nick, is that I've tried really hard. DeCarlin and I have tried really hard with like the sort of onboarding of council members, but also the sort of like foundation setting of like, what's the role of council and city staff, like city manager and council. And that's why we did the retreats, right? So we do those retreats. You've just been elected in April. We go on a retreat in May where we have time with the department leadership. You understand a little bit more. You've had some of those meet and greets with departments, but you're really like, how do we build this relationship? What are we working on together? But I've had two of those council members up there started in August. So they didn't even, they didn't get to the retreat until like the following year. We've had, again, the turnover that we've had, like it's that opportunity to sort of like build the sisterhood in our current case, now that we're losing Nick. To do that has been kind of strife. And then most of these people that are coming in August, they have a budget to pass.
But here's the thing. I read and followed what Nick did at the retreat, and I thought that was terrific. And I told him so.
He just sent me pictures where I looked really awkward.
He did an excellent job of reporting on the retreat. Then I watched the next city council meetings, and there's nothing from that retreat that carried over to the city council meeting. It was frustrating to me to think, well, I trust what Nick reported,
David,
and you said you wanted this as council members, and then you come to the meeting and you repeat the same thing that you've been doing before that retreat. So you didn't learn anything from the retreat.
I had some similar frustrations. I think maybe it's because like when you do get out of town, it's a lot easier to be like vulnerable and open. And then the next thing, 2 days later, you're up in front of cameras, microphones.
And you're exactly right.
And so I think to me, it was funny. I was actually writing this down in my notebook. I was like, okay, so when would be a better retreat date? I'm thinking not the Thursday, Friday right before a council meeting, but then also maybe in April, like as soon as we can, like let's get together and do some ground setting. When a new council member comes on, I sit down with them. I offer like shortly after, even before they're sworn in, to sit down and kind of go over like, here's the cadence of our meetings. Like, here's the sort of rules of engagement at our like just those sort of norms. But I realized like that's one, and then they go into a voting session the following Monday.
So my other question, and then I'll let Nick move us on. And I don't think I can get an answer on this from you, and I don't think a staff member, but departments head and staff members who come to the council meeting, and I feel come prepared. And I think these are professionals. I think they have put in a lot of time in the issues that they are there to educate us on. How many times do they sit there in their mind thinking, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I
That
mean,
this is
I can't speak to that, but I know there's probably some inner monologues.
I just can't imagine that they don't get together sometime with the city manager, maybe at the department head meetings, what he has on Tuesdays or whenever that is, and say, you know what? How could they ask these questions? How could they? But I think sometimes those are worthwhile questions because staff has practiced under a certain way and a process, and now they are being challenged to say, well, why are you doing it this way? So I get there's some value in that. But at the same time, I get that there needs to be a little bit more respect for the work that the staff has put in and say, you know what, these aren't people that are coming and just
Yeah.
spontaneously presenting these things.
I think it's interesting. One of the things that I really appreciated about the retreat, and I think I've told you before, like I'm still really good friends with Peter Stiepelman, and we touch base like monthly. And one of the things we were talking about, because where I got the idea from the retreat was, yes, I was aware that the city used to do retreats, but when Peter was the superintendent and he would have the school board, they would do a retreat, and it'd be that sort of like let's ground set. Let's talk about our whys. Like, why are we doing this? And let's like calendar out the year. Like, what big things are going to be coming up so that you're not surprised and so that's kind of where the retreat idea came from. And one of the things that he and I were talking about, one of my favorite parts about this retreat was the first icebreaker that we did was on like your why, or not, it was intros, right? It was like, why? Why do you do this? And then as I'm talking to Peter, one of our conversations we're having is like, yeah, but why? And like the continuing of that, the five
Hmm.
whys, like that sort of activity. And to me, it helped a lot because it really helps me understand where my council members are coming from, as well as my staff members, right? So Jackie Sample, her why that she talked about, right? She has an autistic son. And so why she does what she does is so that like local government, the city is more accessible to her son and than others, right? So she's thinking about accessibility because that's her why. And that helps me a lot with, this is why Jackie is so adamant about virtual meeting opportunities and engagements and the bus. You know what I mean? Like, I get it. To me, it might be like if I wasn't paying attention, it might be like, gosh, here's Jackie again on her. No, because I get her why. And I think that helps when, especially you're meeting new people. Like, some of the council members I'd never met before until day one election. And so to hear what their why is can help me a little bit in understanding their questioning. And same goes for city staff, right? Why are they asking that? So I'm hopeful that city staff had a similar takeaway when they heard those whys. I don't know if it would answer the question about what happened on Monday night, but at least might answer some of the questions that are being asked of them.
I just want to add, so I was quiet here for a second on my phone doing some quick math
Oh, no.
on just briefly circle back to the turnover on council.
Mm,
And if my math is accurate, which that's a big if, you as mayor, just in your 4 years, have served alongside 12 to 13 different council members.
yes.
The council's made up of 7 people, including yourself.
Yes.
That is a staggering number.
Yes.
Frankly, the only person that hasn't changed that whole time has been Betsy Peters.
Right.
And I think that by itself speaks volumes as to the
If you listen
challenges and instability that the council itself has to be facing.
last night during Nick's comments, if you listen to Nick's comments, Nick said, I've had the pleasure of serving with many, of you. He's like, Pat, Nick, Valerie. He's like, Andrea, Lisa, Vera, Roy, Jackie, Barbara, Betsy. And so, yeah, those sort of
Don.
Don,
Yeah.
sorry, Don. Oh, yeah, Don,
Yeah.
Christina. So yeah, that's 12.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's been, and so when we talk about this sort of foundational setting of relationships, I was talking this morning to a girls in emergency management camp. It was at Boone County Office of Emergency Management Office, and the one of the people asked me, one of the girls asked me, and she was just kind of like, why did you feel comfortable running? Like, why did you do this? And I was like, well, I looked at the other people that were thinking of running, and I was like, they have no experience or understanding of local government. Not to say they couldn't learn it, but we were at a period, I was forecasting, we were at a period of change. We were having a new city manager. We were going to have a new mayor. We were going to have a new third ward council, or potentially new third, and then for sure a new fourth ward council member. We had an interim, we had so many interim directors. And I just looked at that and I said, I felt a need, I don't know, an obligation almost to run.
Duty.
A duty, yeah, to serve because I could. I had the capacity to do it. And so when you look at then the tenure of people on council, like I mean, we're lucky that a few of them served on boards and commissions, so they get a little bit of, right, the either understanding of the meetings or a little bit of some of the departments, not the whole breadth of it. But when you have people coming on new, that they both don't either have that experience or that knowledge or the relationships, and that's really it's difficult. And I try really hard, but yeah, there are times where sometimes on Monday I have to do my poker face, David Lile.
Well,
Uh,
I complimented you, I think, before we started this program
Yeah.
at the way that you do catch what's happening and move things along by, I think, being a nice bridge between council and staff.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. Sometimes it doesn't come early enough in the discussion to suit me, but it does happen. And
Well,
I appreciate that because you're respective of all of the feelings of everybody involved. I like that because that's a talent and a strength that not all of us have. I would also say something else that Nick Foster said in his remarks last night was his appreciation and respect for and dependence on staff that we never hear about that are in these offices that I don't know who they are. I mean, I know Sheila Amin, but I don't know others up here who also, I think, are at the service to council members when they come with the right approach. And then also staff. I mean, I'm sorry, the department heads and others. So I think that he got it. Again, I think that it's a matter of I think that there are some first, second, and third year council members that get it better than others.
And I will tell you,
And
you know,
it sometimes might be related to age and
Yeah.
experience, like you just said.
one of the things though that I started out the retreat with talking about, government moves at the speed of trust, right? This idea that, over the last 4 years, we've really worked hard to build this foundation of trust between council and staff. And that's why you've seen some things that hadn't been moved finally, right? Opportunity Campus, finally having a place for a permanent room at the inn, a location, really thinking about investing in the police department with our own academy for helping with recruitment and retention, the engagement things that you mentioned, right? To get out there in the community. But one of the things that I sometimes see that I also, though, get pushback because as a former city staffer and as a person who's like, I'm going to assume good intent with staff members and I'm going to work on like, okay, if you're the professional, you're telling me that, and we've built this trust, I'm going to trust this. Like you get my vision of where I want to go, but you're the one who's going to implement it. I then see me getting pushback as if I'm like, oh, she's just part of the establishment, right? And she's continuing that. And I think the thing that frustrates me the most when I see those kind of comments is that we have moved forward on so many of the things that you same people are fighting for, right? That you are passionate about. Why can't it be both? Why can't it be a yes and? Why can't I move forward our infrastructure, our progressive value? Why can't I do these things and also trust city staff? Why does it have to be an either or? Because to me, it's not, and that's not helpful to us moving forward as a city, as a society, as a nation. So that's just a frustrating thing that I see.
I totally agree with you because I have made the comment as recently as at the most recent city council meeting at home as I was watching this to my wife that if the council said, we will give you X person $1 million and a brand new home and create your neighborhood in the image that you want it created, that person would still show up at the next meeting and have a complaint. They just do. I mean, period. It doesn't matter what you do. They're always going to see it through a certain lens, and it's never going to be satisfactory.
And I think, there's this point too where it's like I can both have trust in city staff and also acknowledge that they're not perfect. Nick, this is, I mean, you probably noticed last night, like I'm like choking up as I'm reading the certificate of appreciation or the resolution of appreciation because he has just been so grounding for me, so centering for me. And one of the things that he said, he was like, we have to remember that people are human. No one is perfect, right? We have to understand that we're all going to make mistakes. And what we do with that, we learn from it, right? Course correct what we can, but learn from it rather than assume it's broken and that the person is then broken and you've lost that. So I think that's where I'm always coming from and will continue to come from.
Who's going to be the mayor pro tem?
Jackie Sample.
Called it.
Go to I'll tell you, here was my thinking on that. Betsy has had the longest tenure on with going for serving. But Betsy also is enjoying her retirement, and I don't want to take that away from her. The mayor pro tem, the mayor, especially, I say yes to a lot of things. Like if a community group wants the mayor to come out, and I have I can do it, right? If they want a proclamation for a meaningful event in their group's organization, I want to provide that. I can't be everywhere at once, and so I really rely on somebody that has that. Jackie is currently doing a few different aspects of her occupational therapy job, working with different groups, but she's no longer having to do a full-time in-person, off-site position. So she has the flexibility. Also, I appreciate her voice and the questions that she asks when we're in our meetings. I will say also her experience as the chair of the Disabilities Commission, like chairing a meeting. I mean, in reality, the mayor pro tem is there when I can't be there. So right, the big part of that is leading the meeting as well as showing up, like to give a proclamation or an event when I can't be there.
I want to ask you about something that I think you said before we started this recording. You were talking about the overall feel in the community of sides and division in certain ways. This is going to get political in a way, but I am curious about your opinion on this. I have a couple of questions. Would it be to the city and council's benefit if some of the so-called business side of political standings had some wins and had some representation more so than they do on the council? I'll start with that question first.
You mean
I'm just curious
like
as
a
to
pro-business candidate?
yes.
I mean, it's interesting because I think, well,
And I ask that question in a way because we see in Jefferson City and elsewhere
yeah,
one side
yeah,
ruling.
yeah.
And I always think it would be better to have
Oh,
more sides
I would
represented
agree.
than one side in control.
I would agree.
And what's happening nationwide and statewide is the flip of what is happening in Columbia. So I guess my second part of that question is, why don't they win some of these races?
I think part of it is because they allow that to happen. You cannot lean into that you are one side over the other. You know, I think you saw it in the Fifth Ward race, right? Don Waterman on council, like was doing, you know, he would sit there, you know, he'd listen and kind of thoughtfully ask the question and move forward, but would also show up to all the things. Like, you know, he would show up to an event that might be a business side event, right? He would show up to that. And I think though what you saw was that in his campaign, he leaned into I want to get the votes that Blair Murphy got in the Fifth Ward because that was a lot of votes. Not taking into account like 10% voter turnout is more likely for a small, you need to appeal to all. You need to actually do like kind of what you said. Whereas like and it's not to say this is not like a Christina versus Don. I'm just saying, as you saw that evident, that was what the campaign. You cannot in a campaign locally in Columbia, you can't lean in. You'll notice in mine, I don't lean into being, you know, the sustainability manager who loves to ride her bike. I lean into the like, this is my experience and understanding how local government works, building relationships. And like, yeah, I like to ride my bike a lot and I would like more opportunities for people to ride their bike for transportation, but that's not my only thing that I am. And so you cannot lean into one thing because we are a nonpartisan race. And that to me means also like not just party, but also like industry.
I think that's a good answer. My follow up then would be, how would the council change if it had more representatives who had a different type of approach or background? If they came from the business community, how would it change the council in your opinion?
I don't know, because it's interesting. Like we still have people with that experience on, right? Who have that experience on council now. I think what we see is that it'd be about where they're getting where how do I say this? It's more of that those in like the business and maybe more conservative fields, they need to also build relationships with who's currently on council. Make those out. Don't make those assumptions. Don't just go to Facebook to give your feedback on what you see happening, but actually call the person up, see if you can get together for coffee. Like I meet with coffee for people from on all sides of the aisle and all different wards. There are a few people in town that talk a lot about me who have never ever as mayor sat down with me for a meeting, a cup of coffee or a phone call. So I find that telling, and that tells me that I don't know that you really want to win so much as you just want to talk. And so that's my issue is, you know, people say a lot of things, but you know what? You're not volunteering to be on a board or commission. You're not coming to a council meeting. You're not even just meeting with me to talk about the issues and ask me what additional information do I have for why I voted the way I did or why I maybe made a statement I did.
I feel compelled to point out, going back to David's point real quick, on the kind of simplistic perspective of like, oh, pro business versus maybe not pro business candidates. Generally speaking, that using that fifth ward race is an interesting example because Christina Hartman is a small business owner.
Right.
Right. So one would assume and imagine that she is quote unquote pro business.
And I think she is. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
she's a graduate of our hub. I mean, she
Yeah.
worked with entrepreneurs
Yeah.
and all of that. But if you watch the campaign, the people who, you would label as pro business or whatever, they only talked about Dawn. They didn't talk about her experience, which she has, right? They didn't talk about the breadth of knowledge that both candidates have. They simplified it. And
Which is politics.
it is politics.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, like in local government, it's not politics. It
Right.
can't be, right? It's kind of like what you see now. I still see games being played on some of these things. And I was like, we don't have time for that. We just need to get the work done because the person who's complaining about that pothole or that roll cart dropped off, you're going to run into at the grocery store.
Well, going back to your point, Barbara, about how like all of this is about relationships, whether it's, we spent a lot of time today talking about the council staff relationship, but I think just as important aspect of this, if not more important, frankly, is the council public relationship. And I mean that both as a whole, but also individually. And I think that's been so demolished by the turnover in council that the community doesn't have the relationships with these individual council members.
Yeah.
As a result and that contributes to that lack of trust that I think David was talking about earlier, where, and as you noted before we started recording, as he said, of like, there's just kind of like, there's a lot of people taking sides and asking questions from a more critical angle, perhaps, or more aggressive angle that wasn't there before. And I do wonder to myself how much of that is because 5 of the 7 council members, I'm already counting Nick Foster's seat, are going to be new people that the community as a whole doesn't have a relationship with. Because if you think back to when you came on council, right? Because you kind of the start of that new generation, so to speak, of elected leadership. Well, before that, you had Carl Scala, Mike Trapp, Ian Thomas, Betsy Peters still at that point, right? Just those 4 people served together like a decade.
Yeah.
Right. And so the community
And they
knew
spanned
them.
multiple mayors.
And they spanned
That
multiple
was,
mayors, but the community knew them, right? People were more likely to know who Ian Thomas was than even Nick Foster now. Certainly more so than, if you're talking about the second ward, right? Vera Elwood is in her first year. And so Mike Trapp served, I think, 3 terms-ish.
Something like
Because
that.
I think he got elected like a weird time. Anyways, but I think that's a big aspect of this that people aren't conscious of and thinking about. We spend a lot of time council staff relationship, but I'm curious your thoughts on the council public relationship and how it's impacted by the consistent turnover in council representation lately, much of which has been things out of people's control.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we had two members with cancer implications. I was recalled, like things like that have occurred where there wasn't a lot of options. Nick Foster's moving.
Yeah.
Right. So it is what it is, but it still has that impact on our community. And I don't think in a positive way.
No, I would agree. And I think part of what plays into that is, when we go back to that kind of like that polarization that you're seeing, it's harder and harder, I mentioned, for me to get people to even want to run. This is a part-time position. I theoretically make $10,000 a year. That's before taxes. And that only just kicked in like this year. It's been $9,000 that my first term. Council members make $6,000. That's again before taxes. And we don't have a staff, but you have people, the public have expectations for what a mayor, what a council member should do, can do. And that's a lot of pressure because those are the people that you're knocking on doors. Also with the turnover, a lot of them, they're just coming off of a campaign where you're talking a lot, you're performing a lot, but it's not that many people paying attention, right? In those forums, there's maybe a dozen people in some of them. David, you're moderating them, right? You can count the rooms. Like in my race, there's always more, right? Because the mayor race, there's usually more people, a few more voter turnout, but ours was like record numbers to have 25% voter turnout in the last campaign. So there's not that many people paying attention. So when it comes also to the relationship building, if you're just coming off of a campaign, the public relationship you have is with usually a small group. And it's not necessarily, you haven't built that engagement as much as if you've served 2 terms, you've knocked on a lot of doors, but you've been to a lot of neighborhood potlucks. You've been to Rotary meetings. You've been to like Ready meetings, chamber, so you've met more people and built those relationships. And that's key.
I think it's a good example of something that I have engaged council members on over the years, both before and after my own service, which is being conscious that, to your point, when a council member is elected, even if at the mayor's race, right, it was 25%, in the ward races, it's much lower.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so I think it's something that council members, especially new ones, which again, a majority of this council is, need to be conscious of and need to be reminded of, not in terms of like taking them down a level, but just being like, hey, be conscious of this, that you think you represent everyone, but you don't, because they don't know you.
You don't have an opportunity. You
You
haven't
don't,
yet built a relationship
yeah,
with
you haven't
them.
built a relationship with them. They haven't built a relationship with you. You got, most of them were elected by like 1,000 people, and every ward I think has over 20,000.
Yeah.
Be conscious of that,
Yeah.
right? At
Yeah.
least until you've been reelected,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like, talk to me after you've been reelected.
Yeah. There's been some recent articles in the Missourian about the discussions around charter reform. And I know there's been a few different like forums over the past few months. And I think it's an interesting conversation because like I like the council manager form of government. I like the idea of your representatives, serving, but then you have a person doing kind of the day to day. Because my biggest fear, and this is the thing, the fire chief will tell you, like, peace out. If we have this sort of thing where it's like, I don't want to tell the police chief how to do their job. I don't want to tell the fire chief how to do their job. Like, they're the professionals in that. And so the concern is if you have that sort of direct responsibility, then it politicizes that position. So I like the sort of separation of this. That said, and I've said it twice now, this is the third time's a charm. I don't know how much longer we can do this with our council doing a part-time, like either not the pay so much, but maybe, but also just like the not having staff support for them in doing these positions and with our expectations. I feel as we continue to grow, there might be some changes that need to happen. I don't know what exactly is right for Columbia. I don't know that any of the current proposals I've heard about are what's right for Columbia, but it's getting harder and harder. I mean, like, I don't know. I've gotten threats against myself and my family. Like, I don't, when these things happen, like, I think about when I see women who are in elected office getting attacked online and potentially in person. Like, that is not an easy job to do. And so it's getting harder and harder to encourage people to do this when the polarization, 'cause I'm going to say it's the polarization I'm seeing in the community and in the nation, is trickling down into how they're treating local electeds.
Well, and it's not only just getting harder to get people to run, but whether or not people are willing to run, even if you get them, the other aspect of this that we have to confront, because it is a part-time volunteer council, is folks are having greater difficulty getting their employers to bless them running.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in a we're not a company town, so to speak, anymore, where everybody and their mom works for MU, but we're still a company town in terms of there's a handful of large employers, and especially a couple of the big ones that I won't call out on this show, I know have pretty much set in from a policy of like, hey, we do not want our members, our employees running for city council, and that has directly impacted some existing council members.
Yeah.
And so when you combine the aspect of it is a less attractive thing to run for overall because of the environment, with the fact that if you run for it, especially against
You might lose your job.
the blessing of your employer, then you risk your financial livelihood.
Yeah.
Which we can all appreciate.
I guess I don't want to end on like the downer side of this thing because it is an extremely rewarding job, a position, a responsibility. It's extremely rewarding to see progress on things you've helped set in motion, or to see a project get accomplished, right? To see the police academy start up and see the graduation for that. They started off a phone call from the chief and the city manager being like, crazy idea. We kind of want to go forward with this in the next budget year. What do you think? Right. And it's so rewarding to see that. It's just that, to your point, people have to have the privilege that they can do this and either live off their husband's paycheck or be retired or have a very flexible, understanding employer, as well as thick skin, which I'm thankful I have, and also just that sort of like ability to want to keep trying, to want to keep showing up. And so it's very rewarding, but yeah, I can understand why it's not for everyone.
I think the importance of listening is something that is not emphasized enough. And I don't think people listen to, like, I would like for people to listen to what you have said over the last hour plus, listen to what the city manager said a program ago, listen to what each of the guests that we've had on, listen and really pay attention, because I think we get good responses from our guests. And I respect what every guest says, whether I agree with everything they've said or not. But it really angers me when you have to to say that there are threats. People are expressing their anger in a way now and their displeasure that is not right. It is wrong, and it just needs to be called out for being wrong. And we should have other programs on this in the future, because somebody else who we've had on talked about threats that she had gotten also. And it's just not right. And I don't care whether you agree or disagree with somebody, you should never threaten them or their family and their safety. It is just not right, and people need to understand that it's going on even at a city level like this. We can understand it goes on a national level, but and more people need to stand up and say, we won't accept that, and we support those who are getting those threats. So
I have a might be a pipe dream, but I would love to do a chamber quarterly membership breakfast on this topic.
that should be
Like at least a part of it, just because that's a group that I know are they're very involved in our community. That's a lot of the movers and shakers from all walks of life that change those. And when I think about the passive absorbance of seeing some of those negative things on either social media or different things, that passive, like maybe they don't like it, but maybe they're kind of like, is there something to that? Or, you know what I mean? Like, or like
maybe.
but I also, I have some friends in town who are like, I'm your keyboard warrior on Reddit, being like, that's not true about Mayor Buffalo. I don't necessarily need that, but I actually think we do need to get to the point that we're calling out some of this behavior,
I would
being like,
totally
that
agree.
is not okay.
It needs to be called out.
Yeah.
And it's just because it is not right. We've all been in jobs where people have criticized us and hate us for saying certain things and maybe having certain positions, but that doesn't mean that you should be threatened. Your safety should be threatened, and it's wrong.
I think we could do a whole series titled The Cost of Serving, because there's a lot to it. I mean, heck, we could talk to the 14 people you've served with just in the last 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
And they've all have a lot to say on the subject. I know. Your comment about the Chamber of Commerce sparks an idea too, which is going back to the whole cost of serving in terms of both the environment, but also employers being unwilling. The chamber might be a good environment to go and broach that subject of saying, hey, these dozen large employers in town, why don't you just uniformly put out a note to your staff being like, hey, we support people running, whether it's for city council or school board, the company will not be an impediment to you. Something broad, right?
That'd be great.
So that people don't have to feel the pressure of even having to come ask.
Yeah.
Just an idea, just being idealistic in that sense. The Chamber of Commerce might be able to may be able to help.
Yeah.
I know we need to end this. I'm used to having a time when we wrap things.
I know there's like a red on-air line that should say off-air.
It's always ticking. But I would just like to say I really appreciate your time, and I'm glad that we had you on again, and look forward to another time. Since we are sitting in your office, I've been looking at some of your books, and I would like to point out that you've got one called Dream Team, which is kind of interesting. I'd like to know more about that. One that is very popular now, There Is No Place for Us. That is a book that everybody, I think, should be reading. But I like the one that is standing up, that is facing us. It says, We the Possibility. That is a good title.
So We the Possibility is written by the former chief of staff for Marty Walsh in Boston, the mayor of Boston. And he wrote it. He is now a professor at Harvard. And he taught a class in my new mayor school when I first was there. And it talks about the sort of innovation, City Hall is innovation. And this idea about, if you're coming up with, sometimes we have to try something new. You have to be okay with failing, but we're only going to do it if we're doing it together. And if we're trying to do something new and improve. So it's a great book.
I know, Nick, we didn't get to talk and Mayor about something that we planned on talking about, but we'll do that again.
Oh, there's always more time to talk. I'm not too worried about it. Yes, Mayor Buffaloe, thank you for coming on the show. We always appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to having you back on, because I'm sure this summer we'll be discussing the public safety tax.
I would gladly come talk about investing in our police and fire departments.
Oh, we'll take you up on that for sure. Well, listeners, this has been the Como Vanguard podcast. This is the companion podcast to the written publication, available on Substack. You can find everything Como Vanguard at comovanguard.com. Submit questions, support the show, tell us how you feel, tell us if you want to run for city council, and things like that. And we will see you next time.
And you were sad that they didn't have hot chocolate. This I remember from going to lunch with you.
Wow.
He
doesn't drink coffee.
I don't drink coffee.
I don't either.
So yeah.
You don't either?
No.
How are you a morning radio person?
I don't know. Just don't do it.
Did you drink any caffeine?
Sheer willpower.
Yeah. I mean, I like soft drinks, but yeah.
What's your favorite soft drink?
It depends. Dr. Pepper's good.
There you go.
Cherry Coke is good.
I love cherry Coke.
Cherry Pepsi is
Oh, and
also
vanilla
also.
Coke.
Root beer, though. I like root beer.